It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just going to get the slides up here because it's a lot of information to share tonight. It's very knowledge-rich tonight that we're going to share some really great insights with you from our IBM survey. So I have a story to tell. Clearly I'm Australian, so I must apologise if you don't understand what I'm saying. I'll try and talk in English. But also this is my third week at IBM, so I'm a brand newbie. I'm now happy to call myself an IBMer. And where I came from, it's an interesting sort of career path because for the last 12 years, I've been in startups. I've been in startups around commercial property, online, mobile advertising, location-based services. Last 5 years, I've been in social media, monitoring services. And most recently, I was CEO of a company called Cred, which is a competitor to Clout. You may have heard of Cred and Clout. We measure social influence. And I've been asked a lot recently, why would you give up a career in startup world and come and work for a company as large as IBM? And I get that question a lot. I was actually doing an entrepreneur workshop lunchtime yesterday and asked me the same thing. Why would you do this? I think that after 12 years in startups, it's time for me to kind of grow up and work in the big world. But also, the experience I've got in working with a number of clients over those last 12 years, I think now's the time to share that inside IBM and share that with our clients. And I think if anyone is going to get this space right, it'll be IBM. So that's the ad over. But delighted to be here and delighted to see some interesting faces in the audience. What I'm going to share with you today, actually I'll give you the link you can download the study after this, is a really interesting study we've just done. We call it our C-suite study. So the C-suite study, it's quite unique this year because for the last 10 years, the Institute of Business Value, which is one of our research arms, has been looking at the C-suite from CMO, CHRO, Chief HR Officer, CEO, and every year we would produce a different study. We thought, why don't we actually look at the whole C-suite and how they interact with each other? So this is the first year we've actually gathered all of the knowledge from all these different C-suite surveys and actually put them in the one report. And as I say, you can download this later on. So introducing the C-suite study, we've actually interviewed more than 4,000 people, and these are face-to-face interviews. This is not some survey we send out or some email. We actually sat down with our valued clients and talked to them face-to-face. And you can see over the years, we've looked at around 6,300 CEOs, we've surveyed 7,000 CEOs. We've had a lot of really interesting discussions with our clients about what they're doing and what's keeping them awake at night. Importantly, the survey hasn't just been about Europe or the US, it's been a global survey. So you can see where we've taken the respondents from. So Western Europe, about 1,000, 1,300 people, North America, 605. Deliberately, we've chosen all around the world to get feedback because the C-suite is being challenged by this new world in all parts of the globe. Interestingly, where they've come from as well. So we've got 4,183 interviews. That's a lot of time sitting down and talking to people. And they've come from a whole range of industries. And I think none of them is sort of overrepresented, 16% there in banking and finance, but we've got a very broad range. And it's really interesting when you have that broad range of discussions across multiple industries, what's really keeping them awake at night and how they're seeing the new world. A lot's changed since we started doing these surveys back in 2004. The key takeout was a focus on cost reduction and looking at global competition. The world's changed a lot since then. The 2008 survey, what came out of that was that business models need to evolve to enable external partnerships. What's come out of the survey from this year is something that I think is really interesting, given my role with social media, that the digitally active customer moves to the top of the C-suite agenda. And as you'll see from one of the slides, the customer is now number 2 in terms of who the C-suite takes advice from after themselves. Why I think that's really interesting is I'm Gen X. I was born in 1968. I was 45 on the weekend. And I think I'm in a really interesting position because I'm old enough, I think, to relate to pretty much everyone in the room in terms of your business challenges. And certainly I feel very comfortable walking into one of your boardrooms and explaining why I think you should be going digital. But I'm young enough that for the last 30 years I've been playing with this stuff. Back in 1983, I was doing dial-up to bulletin boards. And in fact, I used the internet so much, or what we called the internet back then. My father made me get a second phone line because I was always on the phone. I could never get through because I was always dialed up to something. And back then, bulletin boards, for those of you not familiar, you'd ring up, you'd leave a message, you'd hang up, and you'd wait and hope that someone was going to reply to your message and ring up and download it again. And I actually made some lifelong friends from a bulletin board in Adelaide, Australia, many years ago. But I'm a marketer and I'm an engineer, and so when social media came along a few years ago, it was a very natural extension for me to understand how I would use this. But I've got to tell you, back in 2007 when I joined Twitter, I thought it was the biggest waste of time. I joined it only because I thought, what is the fuss all about? What are people talking about this new Twitter thing? And I got onto it and I understood how it worked and how it could benefit me as an individual and also in my business. And even LinkedIn, when I joined it in 2004, again, what, is this a pyramid scheme? But when I joined LinkedIn in 2004, as you can do today, you can actually upload your contact list. And there were 32 people that were also using LinkedIn back then. And they were the sort of people that should be using it. So I've been playing with this stuff for a while, almost to try and break it. A new network comes out, I'll actually try and see how you can get the best out of it. So I think where I can add value in this world is translating this new stuff and how you use digital and social into the old world as well. And I think that is what the survey really has brought out. So let's look at the CXO's view of the world and see where their challenges are. What's really interesting here is that over time, this is actually, the slide is slightly washed out. We're looking at what the CEO is keeping busy with. So moving from socioeconomic factors in 2004, and very much in the last few years, technology factors is what's keeping a CEO awake at night. Because he and she is realizing that technology is starting to drive the business and also consumers are getting more control. The great thing about social media is that it gives consumers power. The bad thing about social media is it gives consumers power, and C-suite are trying to work out how to harness that. What's interesting also is over the last 3 to 5 years, how the different C-level positions have seen what's important. And you can see the CEO has moved from technology factors, the CFO is seeing microeconomic is important. The other thing we'll show in a slide later on is how all of these C-suite participants actually interact with each other. Because while you've got these disparate silos in some way, they need to talk to each other. The CXOs expect to reframe their approach. They see that collaboration and open business is going to be more important. And in fact, when we surveyed them, we saw that having a bigger partner network is more important. That face-to-face versus social and digital interaction is becoming more important. They need to partner to increase value. So this is where the shift is happening because digital is opening up so many opportunities both for companies but also for consumers. So let's look at how the C-suite is preparing for the future and are they capable of actually harnessing all the opportunities that digital brings to it. So what we saw is that CXOs aren't just listening to customers, they're now being compelled to act. And they're actually now almost giving consumers a seat at the table, a virtual table. And we're seeing here that 54% of the C-suite is influenced to a large extent by the customer. And there's a great quote here from the CEO of a retail industry in Turkey. As customers gain more power over the business via social media, their expectations keep rising and their tolerance keeps decreasing. Now I know that firsthand because when I am annoyed with a when I'm annoyed with a company, I no longer call centres. And many of you probably run call centres, and I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't like sitting on hold, pushing 1, 2, and 3, and being a valued customer. And I tweet. I tweet for 2 reasons. One is I know, because I'm in the industry, that someone will take notice because it's a very public display of upsettedness. And secondly, it's asynchronous. When I tweet, if you respond to me, I'll then go and do something else. But if I'm hanging on the phone for 45 minutes waiting for the right agent to take my call, for me as a consumer, that's wrong. So Twitter for me has enabled me to say I need help, have my help responded, and then get on with my life. But I think the CEO quote there is very telling, that the tolerance keeps decreasing. Years ago, I worked with a financial institution, and their stats internally were that a tweet had to be answered within 90 minutes. That has come down, now about 45 minutes or 30 minutes. If you haven't answered a social media interaction, then people think you're not there. And this is where the intolerance happens. And so the C-suite is seeing that. How do we react to that? How do we put processes in place to actually absorb what's going on? So this is probably the most telling slide in the whole pack. And when I was going through the slides the first time, this is what stood out for me. That the voice in the board, clearly they think their own voices are most important, but now the second most important voice in the board is customer. Board of directors, corporate strategy comes after that. And I think that's really telling. And the fact that we surveyed 4,100 people, this is not just skewing the information. This is the C-suite saying, yes, customers are now really important because they can talk back, because we can get feedback from them as well. But CEOs want to share control with customers, which I found interesting as well, because you might think, well, I'm running my own corporate strategy. Why would I want to give customers any control of my strategy? But what our survey said was that where CEOs today want to include customers, this is new product and service definition, and where they want to get to is a 90% involvement. Now, you'll see that my title says social business. It deliberately doesn't say social media, because after 7 or so years of playing in social media, I'm kind of over it. I would now like social to be deployed deep inside an organization. And so where I delineate what social media is versus social business, social business is where you use all these things that are happening on social media and on digital channels, and you bring them deep inside the organization. Now, years ago in Australia, I used to work in product development, and the way we learned what customers wanted was traditional market research. You brief an agency, the survey would go out, it would take 4 weeks, then they'd bring it back 6 weeks. A month or 3 later, you get the insight about what you're doing. And that just takes too long. In this new digital world, it's got to be a lot faster. So smart CEOs and smart CMOs are saying, let's actually do a quick poll. Let's see what's happening on social media. But let's make sure that that information goes beyond the marketing department and gets deep inside the organization. So the product development team actually get real, raw feedback about what's going on. About 3 years ago, I helped a well-known retail company, let's call them John Lewis, launch onto social media. And they said to me at the time, when we launch, you know what's going to happen? Everyone's going to complain about delivery. Right? Okay, we launched, everyone complained about delivery. And so I said to them, well, why don't you fix the delivery problem and actually use what they're telling you? It's raw, it's real. There's a problem here. My thing was late, it was broken, the driver was angry. Use that raw, unstructured data to actually inform your product decisions. One thing I say a lot of is that social media is the best piece of market research you never commissioned. It's real time, but the challenge is how do you actually work out whether Andrew Grill banging on about a missed delivery is someone worth worrying about. So this is why I think this is really interesting, that testing products, new product policies, the CEO wants them involved. The last role I had was, as I said, CEO of Cred, which is an influencer company. So we spent a lot of time actually working out who is influential and how people can actually be used to further a product idea. And I've also been a blogger for a number of years, and when I advise clients about what to do, they say, well, once we've found these influencers, what do we do? And I say something very simple. You pick up the phone. You ring them and you say, hi, it's Andrew Grill here from IBM. I'd like to have a chat to you about that blog post you wrote. It was really interesting. Now, because I've been blogging for so many years, I still get flattered when someone says they've read my blog post. I blog for love. I don't get paid for it. I'm not told to do it. I do it because I love doing it. So the power the consumer has works in reverse, where a brand rings up and says, we'd love to talk to you about what you've just done. We'd love to involve you in our product feedback because you look like you really love our product, or you've had some problems with it. Years ago, famously, BT went from an organization with no social presence to one that is a very well-rounded one. And in fact, Warren Buckley, who at the time was head of BT Care, saw a tweet where someone said, I hate BT Vision. And what he did off his own back is he set up a Twitter handle, which is now known as BT Care, and he responded. And in a few hours, they took them from someone who hated BT Vision to actually tolerated them. But what BT do, it's quite public information, they have 25 people in Northern Ireland that do nothing other than respond on Twitter. So they've seen the power of actually having a direct way to respond with people. But imagine the power if you could harness all those people that like your product to actually develop new products. I think that's really important, and the survey certainly bears that out. So developing business strategy, you might think, well, that's the domain of the C-suite and the board and our strategic team. Why would we bother letting customers involved in it? Well, customers are your best assets. They're the ones that actually use the product. They're the ones that have problems with it. Often I hear of people that never use their competitor's product. If I was in Coke, I'd be drinking lots of Pepsi to actually understand how the product works. If I was the CEO of Ryanair, I'd be on EasyJet. I don't think I've ever seen Michael O'Leary on EasyJet, but I would be on there because you'd want to understand how their product works and why it is that it has a different differentiator. So I think we'll actually see, and there's a great quote here from Paul Graham, who's the CEO of DHL from Singapore, and he said, in the next few years, we want to build deep strategic relationships with our customers, enterprise-to-enterprise relationships where the customer is for life. It may sound really foreign because we're now letting the customer dictate what we're doing, and I don't think that's what the survey has borne out. It's basically wanting the customer involved. Customers are crying out to be involved in new product development. I've seen that firsthand. And companies that don't listen are missing a trick, because you've got someone who is an advocate, who loves the product, who is paid for it, actually telling you how it might develop. So I think that's certainly something I'm seeing firsthand as well. The survey also said that these deep and trusted relationships will pay off, and we classified organisations as underperformers and outperformers, and that was obvious what they are. And the outperformers were seeing greater collaboration. That's best practice, really getting involved with the customers and asking them how you want the product to develop. And close collaboration, we saw 9 out of 10 CXOs foresee doing this in the near future when they're actually collaborating with customers. And there are so many ways to do that. It could be as simple as listening on Twitter. It could be forums. It could be evenings like this when you have drinks and nibbles and ask people about the product. It could be extending your internal social network out to customers and having them being involved in things. The other BT example is that BT run a forum for customer queries. And there's one woman apparently who spends 40 hours a week, unpaid, answering questions because she loves BT so much. Maybe not everyone in the room loves BT, but she certainly does. And she sees it as her role to actually do that. There's another company in the UK called giffgaff that's an MVNO. It's a small company run out of O2. They have 20 staff and they do customer care with their community. They get their customers to be passionate brand advocates to say, Richard's got a problem with his SIM, I know how to fix that. And more often than not, their own customers are responding to feedback on social networks before the staff even get to it. This is the future. Coupled with that is the whole notion of big data. Everything you're doing on social is tracked. Now I know that because the company I worked with before, we had access to what's called the Twitter fire hose. Over 5 years, we gathered 200 billion tweets, every single tweet in real time. Imagine what you can do with that big data and start understanding what people are doing and what they're saying and what segment they're in and those sort of things. And don't get me started on what you can do with customer relationship systems and Twitter and those sort of things. It's so powerful. So how is the C-suite preparing for the future? They realise there's a problem, they want the customers front and centre. How are they preparing? Well, the digital and physical is what's really coming out of here. So the physical would be your store, digital is online. How do we get the two together? And the real challenge for the C-suite at the moment is how do we get these two together? They're very disparate. And you see lots of organisations going to the wall, HMV, Jessops. In fact, I'm going to do a C-suite briefing in the next couple of weeks. You won't be there maybe, so I'll test this on you. Hands up, who would like to be the next HMV? No hands. Amazing. What happened with HMV is they really missed a trick. They didn't see digital coming and that people were downloading things. They weren't going to buy the physical product in the store. The same with Jessops. I don't own a still camera anymore. I have 3 or 4 phones that do just as good a job. So organisations like that were not able to respond possibly, and no one wants to be like that. They want to be like Burberry. Burberry is a standout. Angela Ahrens, their CEO, has just announced she's going to Apple to head their retail group, which is an amazing role for her. But the last quarterly results, they were up 18%. She said that footfall in stores was down, but digital was up. You know what Angela has done? Angela has said, I don't have all the answers, but guess what? Most of my customers and most of my staff are under 30. Let's ask them. So Angela set up a digital council of her own staff to advise her and an executive council to enact what those young 30-somethings were looking at. So she is responding to this new way, and digital for them is a real driver. So how do you become the next Burberry rather than the next HMV? The broad digital strategy, they are putting in place. They're putting cross-channel touch points. They're looking at supply chains. It's still early days, though, I think, as well. Digitising the front office. There's a great quote here from Enrico, who's CEO of Post Finance in Switzerland. A big opportunity for us lies in establishing new business models and new digital services. We're investing in digital wallets, digital goods, and mobile banking. They're a post office who have said that people are sending less and less letters. How can we actually reinvent ourselves and pivot on what we're great at? Yesterday I heard that eBay has bought a company called, I forgot the name of it now, it's called Tracker or Chaser or something like that. They will deliver something to you in London in 1 hour. Consumers are now getting greedy. They're saying, I want instant gratification. I want that latest phone. I want it in my hand in 1 hour. And that's where I think things are going. So for logistics companies, this is a real challenge and also an opportunity. How do you stay relevant when people are wanting things in 1 hour? What they're also seeing is that there is a lack of a cohesive social media plan. Now, I think as an industry, my old industry, social media industry, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice, because when we go to the C-suite and we try and ask for funding about our new social media plan, whatever it is, we talk about fans, followers, likes, and all this stuff that the C-suite doesn't understand. So I'm going to assume that some of my C-suite customers will never understand Twitter and Facebook. That's okay. So why don't we talk to them in terms they understand? Return on investment, reducing customer churn, employee satisfaction, ROI, those sort of things. And I've seen that when you do that, and you can translate what that means into a digital or a social strategy, the C-suite go, yeah, you've got your $5 million for that because that will actually improve my bottom line. So my peers, I'm trying to educate them not to talk in social terms at the C-suite. And I think this is why this came out, because there is no social media plan because they're being bombarded with the wrong messages. Don't tell anyone, but you can buy followers and you can buy likes. There was a great Channel 4 program a few weeks ago that talked about how in, I think it was Bangladesh, you can pay $50 and get thousands of Facebook likes. I only have 9,000 followers on Twitter. I could have 100,000 for $50 overnight. I've chosen not to do that. One, it's wrong, but two, it sends the wrong message. But you should never just look at these metrics that we're pushing into the C-suite and say that's what you should measure your company on. The fully integrated digital physical strategy, I don't think many companies are just there yet, because it's tough to get what's happening online and have a great offline strategy as well and put the two together. That is tough, and that's what I think is keeping most of the C-suite awake at night. So the third sort of key highlight of the report was, how do we craft engaging customer experiences? We've got these new digital channels, we've got all this knowledge, how do we actually make this fun and exciting? And what the C-suite is saying is, where they're getting personally involved, as either personally or as a company, they're doing more in terms of customer experience management, e-commerce and talent management. They're doing less in terms of supplier management. The customer comes out here as the really important brick in their whole campaign. And the focus here, you can see where it's changed in terms of customer experience management. The CMO is getting very excited about this. And we talk a lot about IBM, about how we used to sell to the CIO, and now our customer is very much the CMO. And the CMO, I think I've seen one CMO in the background. There are any CMOs in the room? I don't envy your position, because there's all this new stuff coming down very quickly. You need to know about digital. You need to know a bit about tech. You need to know about these new channels. And so I think we're seeing the CMOs becoming a very interesting beast in themselves, because they've got to learn all these new technologies. But also, I think the CMO role is more sexy than the CIO role. Customer interaction channels. Look what's happening here. They want to interact digitally with customers, even more than face-to-face. They see this obviously as a way to drive costs out of the business, but also for people like me, digital has become my preferred channel. I said before, I no longer pick up the phone, I tweet. I don't like going into stores because I've got to wait. You know what happens? This is my bugbear. I'm in the store, I bothered to travel all the way across London, the phone rings, I pick the phone up, hello, can you just hold off a second? Hang on, I'm just coming into the store. So I have these bad experiences, that's why I use digital. My wife, who is anti-social media, she said, where are you going to be tonight? Look on my Twitter feed. I don't want to look at your Twitter feed. She shops online. 3 years ago, she discovered Amazon, and my credit card has never picked up since. But she actually buys fashion online because she doesn't have to walk around a store, and when they send it to her, you can return it very easily. So for her, someone who's very anti the stuff I do, she sees digital as the most effective channel for her. Improving customer experience. Respond quickly to emerging trends. Really on the bottom there, a D- in my estimation, is engaging customer via social business. It's hard. It's hard for two reasons. One is, I think a lot of companies pay what I call the Twitter tax. They say, hey, we're on social media, tweet us. And they do. And your 30 years of broken processes are exposed overnight. So I think one of the warnings is, before you go and say, we're on social, understand what your issues are, a bit like the John Lewis experience. What will people complain about, and fix those up? But when you're on social, be really transparent. Someone tweets you saying there's a problem with supply chain. Wow, thanks for that, we're looking into it. And then get back to them and say, you know what, we've fixed that problem, thanks to you. Another really good example, 12 months ago, EE launched their 4G service, and I wanted to be, because I'm an early adopter, the first person, or one of the first, to have a 4G service. To cut a long story short, they sent me the wrong SIM card, not once, not twice, but 3 times. So I tweeted about it, and I blogged about it, and I rang them. And I got into the Telegraph, and I got invited to meet their senior executive at Paddington. And in fact, I said, I want to meet Olaf Swante, your CEO, because I think I can suggest how you might improve things. And he said, well, Olaf's really busy next door on the board meeting talking about your blog post. But we turned it around because I said, you're really lucky that as a blogger, it happened to me, because we then crafted an influencer campaign. And in fact, my iPad here is a freebie from EE, as is 12 months of 4G. But in return, myself and 4 of my friends have now become EE advocates. What I'm proud about is not that I caused EE some pain because I got in the newspaper and I blogged about them, but the problem I had was actually a physical problem. The SIM card they'd sent me in the warehouse was the wrong one. There was a process issue. They would probably never have found that process issue for months. But because an influencer actually said something and it went viral, they were able to fix that process very, very quickly, and they learnt from it. So, we turned a bad situation into a great one. So that's why I think engaging on social is a real challenge. They don't understand their customers and anticipate going forward they will. That's kind of a no-brainer. I'm not sure why I left this slide in there. Customer understanding, the more likely it is to flourish. I mean, this is obvious as well, but it's interesting that 4,137 C-suite are saying this. And they want to improve the customer experience. A great quote here from Director of Global Marketing at the Dow Jones Chemical Company. It's a race to the finish line. The companies that best understand all aspects of the value chain and get a 360-degree view for the customer experience will win. And that includes these new channels. And I think that's why it's so important. So pulling together, how do we learn from what we've actually heard from all these great C-suite executives about how they can fix it all? So they want to collaborate more extensively across internal and external borders. So I'm 3 weeks in here at IBM, and all the different systems are being thrown at me. The most important and the most interesting one is our internal social network. It's called Connections. It's one of our products. But it's a bit like Twitter for grown-ups in that you can follow people and what have you. But I've learned so much by connecting with people that I would never meet around the world. I've had senior executives welcome me on the social network, and I can get advice and help from anyone across our 400,000 odd employees. So we're learning to collaborate internally, and also it would be great if we could collaborate externally as well with clients. But collaborating internally is just so important. And the example I gave yesterday resonated, so I'm going to use it again. So let's say we're a different organisation. We actually manufacture bikes. And there's been a recall because this bike chain has come off and injured a child. So we're in panic mode. What do we do to fix this problem? Do we do a product recall? What are we doing? We're in crisis mode. So we've put out on our internal social network that there's a real problem with the new XJ5 bicycle. Does anyone know how we're going to fix this? Now, Bob, who's in accounts, isn't on Twitter, isn't on Facebook, hates social media. But Bob was on the internal social network, and Bob knows how to fix this because he's an avid cyclist. We would never have found Bob because he's not on the HR team, he's not on the product development team. We're able to tell the company that we need some help, and can someone help us? So I think you'll find people that hate the public social media sites and will never go on them will be encouraged to actually use the internal ones. And in fact, Ginny Remedi, our CEO, said recently on a video that she's looking at how we actually reward people that share. So if I share more than Richard, maybe I'll get a higher rating and better compensation. Now that may artificially drive our behaviour, but 20 years ago, if I told you you had to carry around this piece of plastic called a phone, you'd probably say, well, how much are you going to pay me for the inconvenience of carrying this thing around? Everyone got a phone here tonight? You're not upset about having it with you? It makes your job easier, makes your life easier. So I think in a few years' time, we'll have these internal collaboration tools. It won't be, oh, I've got to update it every day. I'm updating it and using it because it's really useful to my job and makes better customer experiences. So I think that's where I'm seeing things go. Obviously, outperforming enterprises liaise closely with partners and suppliers. And I think using digital and collaboration tools like that mean that when you have a problem, your extended family, that be your partners and your customers, can be involved. And I think the notion of sharing and being transparent is so important, because when you're transparent and you say, yes, we've got a problem, people will rally to fix. I think the worst examples on social media are everything's fine. Eurostar years ago had a problem where trains were stuck in the tunnel, and the PR response was say nothing. But there were hundreds of people stuck in the train, and they wanted to know what was going on. If they did it another way, it would have been more transparent, and people would have recognised that. The alternate is, I love this example, O2 last year, I think, had a massive network outage. And someone tweeted, O2, go yourself. A bit rude. The response was, sorry, we're a bit busy to do that at the moment, trying to fix the network for you. So you can use humour. And I actually spoke to the people at O2 that did that, and I said, how would you have got that approved? He said, there's no way that legal would approve that tweet. But we've given our employees a brief and a scope to say what's okay. That was probably just on the margin, but I'm talking about it, and it made the trade press, and people saw O2 as a really forward-thinking brand because they were able to have some license and have some fun on this new network. This is the slide that really, I think, shows how the different C-suite are connected to each other. And when you download the report from the link I'll give you in a moment, you'll see how this looks close up. But you've got different interconnectivity, and they're not, I don't think, fighting with each other anymore. They're wanting to collaborate. They're wanting to understand what other parts of their business is doing. So you'll see much more collaboration. And CEOs heading out performing enterprises, clear proof. Yep, we know that. That's great. How you can get more information, we have an iPad app. There's a link to download I'll give you in a second. This whole report is also in physical format for those of you that don't like digital. It's fantastic because I think it really encompasses not just the siloed approach of what the CEO or the CMO or the CIO thinks. It really looks at what 4,000 odd executives are saying and what's keeping them awake at night. So hopefully some of what I've said will resonate in your business. There's the link isn't there. I'll give the link later on. It will resonate in your business, and be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating for me. We're going to come to the floor and ask some questions in a moment, and we've got some mics handing around. I've got a couple of quick questions, if I may. In one of your later graphs, you showed the interlinking, the relationship between the different C-suites. What's your view about the relationship and how strong it is or should be between the CMO and the CIO?
I think they've got to be best friends. I think they realise their complementary skills. In fact, what is happening, I think News Corp is a good example. They've actually put in someone in between called a Chief Digital Officer, which I think is really confusing because am I doing the marketing role? Am I doing the I role of CIO? And what are they doing in the middle there? So I think they need to become best friends. But what I think is really interesting is that the CIO and the CMO of today will probably retire in 5 to 15 years. The ones coming up are the millennials. These are ones younger than me that are always on. They are completely digital natives. And so I think you'll see a different skill set. You'll see a CIO that has a strong marketing understanding, and you'll see a CIO that also understands each other's role. I think what's important is understand where their pain point is. A CIO doesn't always do the CMO's job. The two are very different. But there is an interconnectivity and about putting the customer first. I think both should see that as the heart of what they're doing. How as a CIO can I put the customer? How can I enable my CMO to have him or her put the customer at the center of the experience?
I was speaking with some people last week, and a CIO, in fact, was basically CIO in his terms was the I being information, whereas most CIOs see the I as infrastructure and kind of running the plumbing. What are your thoughts about that? How forward-thinking should CIOs be in those relationships?
Well, I think what CMOs are seeing and what they should be telling the CIO to look out for is big data. Because whether it comes into the organisation through the CIO's door or it's being analysed through the CMO's office as well, they need to understand that it's there and it isn't going to go away. Now, with revolutions from companies like Google and actually being able to process things a lot faster, the fact that we looked at 200 billion tweets and we can store them all and process them, I think you've got the ability to do that. On the way out, you'll see a display from a thing called Watson. I had a dog called Watson years ago, but this is a very different Watson. This is the Watson that won Jeopardy about 3 or 4 years ago, that we then sent to medical school to help solve oncology problems, who is now helping customer service, who in fact analysed many of the verbatims from this report to actually understand more about it. So that's big data. You've got 4,000 interviews, even that's big data. So I think big data is the real linchpin here.
And touching on the data point, I mean, you talked, what was your quote? Social media is the best market research you've never commissioned, or something like that. Have you got any examples of how to bring that to life, how companies have actually used
Well, my friends at John Lewis will give you the example. So when at another company, we provide them with social media listening services to the market research team. These are 3 people in Victoria, so very small team. What they would normally do is there's traditional market research. Once a month, they would go and survey their 30 stores and interview 30 people and get it all together. What they saw with social is that they had what would normally take 6 weeks to come back in 3 days. And they told me those 3 people then became 6 because the intelligence they got from being able to look at the proxy of market research on social was giving them essentially 3 headcounts. So that is a real-world example of a market research department. Now, what was interesting, my first meeting with the John Lewis market research team, who I love to death, was like that. What do you think you're going to do to help me? And I turned it from that to actually a hug in 45 minutes. And when I signed a contract with them at John Lewis, I got a kiss as well. So I love challenging the market researchers to say, we'll never use this, for them to say, wow, unstructured data, we should love that because it can really help what we're doing.
So when do we hug? No, later maybe.
I'm a hugger.
I'm very English. There is... Did
That's
I really
why I'm
say
Australian,
that?
Yeah.
Any questions from the floor about what Andrew's gone through? Because I can keep asking lots of questions.
Stunned
silence.
Who believes some of this? Who thinks this is the new world and we should be preparing for this? Yeah? This should be keeping some of you awake at night and your groups as well. Yeah. I'm glad the hands went up there, otherwise we're in the wrong room.
We've got a question here. If we've got a mic, sorry. Oh, sorry, just one moment. Bring a mic. If you could just let us know your name and where you're from, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, Chris Clark from Clark Marketing, looking after small clients in London. And Andrew, a slightly different question. One of my clients are seeking to go and change opinion in the land in Britain. And the issue is political, and it's a regime in the Middle East that's been dealt with. And my question is, because they really are fretting about this, is how can we roughly estimate the size of a team using Twitter to put a point of view from the other side? Your metric on British Telecom was so interesting, but is there any sort of rules of thumb you can think of where we can actually say, yeah, we reckon it's about 10 people doing this stuff, or 20 people, or 5? What's your thoughts?
So one answer is you build up a huge team sitting on Twitter all day waiting for someone to complain about you, or you use the gift-gaff model where you actually go back to your community. But you don't do that overnight. You need to build legions of fans, people that love your product. Now the difference is, and this is where I could spend hours on this, but I won't, you've got celebrities that are paid to say things. So the Kim Kardashians of this world, you pay her enough money, she'll say anything. That's okay, because that's celebrity. You've then got bloggers who have actually become pro bloggers, and they get paid about £5,000 a month, the fashion ones do, to say nice things about your product. But you and I know from when I told you that you can be bought. In fact, the New York Times bestseller list can be gamed. Wall Street Journal back in March did some analysis and worked out that you can actually game bestseller lists. This is what we call social proof. If someone sees it's good. So the answer I would have to you is that my best practice would be get an idea of who loves your product. Ring them up, say, hi, it's Andrew here from Company X. We understand you blog about this. We'd love you to become one of our advocates. And you manage them in a similar way you manage journalists, because journalists, you need to know who's good for this story, but you actually have an ongoing dialogue. This is not something that's done overnight. It can be a months and months of process. So with my relationship with EE, this is almost coming up to 12 months now. I have a direct line to their PR team. What's happening now is if people put a comment on my blog about how bad EE customer service is, rather than hit publish, I actually email it to my contact at EE and they fix it. So I'm actually deflecting that, because when you're an advocate for something, my own personal brand's at risk. I'm here saying EE are fantastic, give me a free iPad, but they make mistakes like everyone does. So I've got to be sensitive that I can't be seen like a celebrity to say it's all wonderful. So to answer your question, build an army of fans and let them do some of that. It's going to be more authentic if people who love, own and pay for the product are saying good things about it than what I say. I'm a marketer. I know how marketing works. I no longer look at advertising. I know how it works. And think of the pain purchase. So if I'm going to buy a new car, new mortgage, change jobs, I want to talk to someone who's been through the process and authentically can tell me what's good or bad. How do you find those people? That's the challenge.
Great. We had a question in the middle here. Yeah, in the middle, and then over to... Got people converging on you.
Hi, Gary Kemp from the Carbon Trust. Some very interesting data. What I'd like to ask is whether you've got any insights that comes from actually delving deeper into that data set. You've got 4,300 responses. I strongly suspect that that's not an homogeneous group of individuals. And whether you found any insight by looking at market sector, by size of company, whether they're B2B or B2C. And particularly, one thing that struck me is whether they've got an oligopolistic share of the market. Because there's a lot of organizations that talk the talk, but do they really walk the walk? And anybody that, well, I've listed a few market sectors, and I'm sure some of the audience will agree, insurance, banking, transport, utilities are all sectors where we tend to choose on least evil rather than best provider.
Yes.
So anything that
So you'll be delighted to know that this was a broad study, and what we're going to be doing and releasing over the next few months is the deep dive. So, okay, we've surveyed these 6 or 8 different CX groups. Let's delve into what the CEOs thought and the CIOs thought. And we've got our friend Watson out there churning all the data as well. So you can imagine this was a big data project. Not sure how much of that we're going to share and how deep it goes, but you'll see in the coming months there'll be a report just on what the CIOs say and what the CMOs say, going on top of this to delve deeper. But to your point about whether that was skewed, you look at the diagram before about the different industries we surveyed. I think there was a pretty broad stretch. I don't think we went and said, well, we'll just talk to banks because they all hate this. I think we're talking to, and IBM represents, thousands of different companies. So I think, from what I've seen, it's a fairly fair representation. And 4,000 chief executives, 4,000 executives, that's a pretty good metric globally that, this is stuff that's really worrying them. So I wouldn't be worried that it's skewed one way or the other, but certainly as the other reports come out, you'll see what different independencies there are. Yeah.
Graham Story from William Data Systems. I'd like to come at this at a slightly different angle. I'm a committed digital marketer, but what we've been hearing about today is the fact that when you then find a problem within the digital marketing reporting, you then have to go one-to-one. And I'm finding that I need 2 skill sets in the company: digital marketeers who think almost digitally, and then other people who can go into a one-to-one conversation with somebody, build a rapprochement, get to the heart of the problem, normally over the phone. And if anybody here has got a 20-year-old son or daughter, would you like to listen to them on the phone, trying to talk to people? It's a skill set where we need to develop more than one skill set. Yeah. And we're moving then out of the digital area into communication one-to-one, which is a little bit more old-fashioned, but it's an essential part of running a digital operation.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you've got that. I mean, the last mile is sometimes you've got to contact someone and you've got to have someone that's knowledgeable. And I don't advocate at all that you put the millennials in charge of any of that, because the challenge is, and this is why I talk deliberately about social media versus social business, and why as a 45-year-old I think I can have some gravitas in that area, is that I'm not talking about Facebook dude and just going to put a Facebook page up dude. You're talking to people that have been through companies and hired and fired people and understand that. But maybe you can use some of the millennials to help make sense of the data, but then you've got to cross-train and upskill your more experienced people to actually understand that. But I don't think there's anyone out there that wants to further their career that wouldn't be interested in upskilling. And I have conversations daily with people saying, I don't want to be on Twitter. So here's why everyone, hands up who's not on Twitter here. A few people. So here are 2 reasons why you need to go on Twitter. When you get home tonight, you need to get a Twitter name. And I've actually, 3 years ago in Australia, I was doing a project with IBM to do that very thing. And the thing that really made me smile is I actually had everyone in the room signing up to a Twitter account. Here are the 2 reasons. One is brand protection. Unless you have a name like John Smith, you can get a great Twitter name. I got Andrew Grill a few years ago. Secondly, if you're going to understand the new world, you can be a passive observer on Twitter. You don't have to tweet. But you get to understand how the medium works. And you follow people and you go, that was really interesting. And this is when social becomes this market research. So I think anyone that is in an experienced position should at least be dabbling with these new tools. I'm not expecting them to be a Twitter master overnight. They understand the language that's used, how people converse on it, the fact that it's immediate, that you actually want an instant gratification. So I think there's both ends of the spectrum. You don't want to have all the kids involved with all that customer contact, but I think the experienced people need to have an understanding of why people are using these new tools. So those of you who put your hand up, including the cameraman in the back, go home tonight and grab a Twitter name and follow me, @AndrewGrill, or sometimes I say interesting stuff.
But he doesn't pay people in faraway countries just to add names. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. So thank you for that.